Hey everybody, this is Mr. Helton. I'm going to be walking you guys through both the Google Slides presentation and the accompanying assignment that we did last week in class. All right, so if you are watching this video, that means you've already turned it in. So nice job. Thank you for getting that in on time. And this is just here to kind of check your answers, for to let me kind of go into some, more detail with some of the content, so you guys have a deeper understanding of what exactly we were talking about. All right, so we're gonna start off for this thing. We're not gonna worry about right now, just because this was more of a in class type assignment, but we led this lesson off with learning about a little bit about India itself. So let's take a look at this map, and we have India over here. You can kind of, if you look closely, you can see the lines, but India is a huge country. All right, um, India is very large. They actually even call it like the Indian subcontinent, meaning it's so large that you almost consider it like a continent within a continent. India is a very rich country in terms of culture and history. Many of the first kind of organized civilizations existed in India. Um, and so it's very old. Old cultures, old religions, which makes it kind of a very beautiful, place to visit and learn about. So we have India right here, and we also have the United Kingdom over here. Okay. One thing I want to point out about when we say India, we're also including this country of Pakistan, was also kind of a part of India at that time. We're also including Burma. So if you guys remember that, um, the story that we read last week, the shooting an elephant, actually took place in Burma. So like Burma is no longer a part of India, but at the time it was a part of India, when George Orwell, the writer, was there as a police officer and things like that. All right. So, based on where these two places are located, how might it be hard for these two countries to be connected in any way? They're so far away. Um, you literally, unless you travel by land, which it's impossible for the United Kingdom, because if you guys can't tell, the United Kingdom is surrounded by water. It's literally an island. They had to go all the way around the bottom of Africa back up to India in order to get there. Um, there was a canal right here, which a canal is where like people would go into an area and they would dig essentially like a river through here. And so then they could travel through the Mediterranean Sea, past Egypt, down by Saudi Arabia, up to India. But this is actually going to cause some issues for them, because that is an example of imperialism too, where they tried to take over Egypt and kind of go through there. So there were a lot of wars fought. But India and the United Kingdom or Britain, very far away from each other. Um, Very slow communication. I mean, we saw this same problem with all the other revolutions that we learned about. We see that, these places and their colonies weren't able to really communicate with each other because of how far away they were. And then, based on the size of these two places, which country do you think would control the other? Britain controlling India or India controlling Britain? And I just wanted you to recognize the fact that, like the United Kingdom they could probably fit three, maybe even four the United Kingdoms inside of India. It's a huge country. England is very small. Great Britain is very small. So by just by size, it doesn't make sense. But again, we're talking about which country had the most resources, which country had a better army, which country had the most money that it could, essentially take over that bigger area. So this first part, I just wanted you guys to recognize the distance between the two places, and also, the size difference. All right, so I'm going to flip back now. I'm going to flip to the slides. All right, and I got the questions pulled up on my phone, so just listen, and I'll say question one is right here, whatever. When we go through that, so let's go over to this slide presentation and present it. Here we go. British imperialism in India, the jewel in the crown. All right. Now, when did the British enter India? Okay, so there's like two main dates that we need to recognize here. And that's the first, that the British entered India in the 1600s. Okay, So we're talking about the 1600s, the 17th century. The British entered India. They did not take over though. All right. So essentially, what they did was like there was this thing called the British East India Company, where it was a company. It was a they would go throughout the world and they would get products from different places in the world and they would send it back to England and sell it to the people. So they weren't taking control. They had a lot of power, but they didn't have total control of India. All right, in the 1600s, they didn't officially take control of India, and this is the answer of number one to number one. They did not officially take control of India until 1858. Okay. There was something called the Sepoy Rebellion. We're actually going to learn about this on Thursday and Friday, where the Indians essentially fought the British for their independence and they lost. Okay. So we know about, rebellions, we know about revolutions where you try and become independent of who's controlling you. And after this, because the British won, the British were like, you know what? We're taking total control of you. So for about almost 200 years, the British did not totally control India. All right, for about 200 years, they did not control India. It wasn't until the Indians fought back where the British were like, okay, you know what? We're taking control. We're taking total control. All right. So why were the British able to rule India? Remember, India is huge. All right. And again, this isn't even all of what was India. It's more up here. And then, you kind of got this area over here. Like, it's huge. Why was this little tiny country in Europe able to take over this giant country? All right. India's big. It has a ton of people. So the thing with India is it's made up of different states, okay? And many of these states speak different languages, they practice different religions, and they even use different money, okay? So imagine the United States. You know, think about us. We have the same government, like we're all a part of the United States government. But then, like, Ohio has its own Ohio government, and Kentucky has its own Kentucky government, and Indiana has its own Indiana government. And but we're still one. We're still together. We're still under the same bigger government. Now there are different laws. Like in Ohio, it used the top speed limit in Ohio used to be 65. The top speed limit in Indiana was 70. All right. I think there's places in Texas where like the speed limit's like 80. All right. So like each state can have some different laws from each other, but because we all belong to the American government, we all speak the same language or we all have the same official language. Obviously, we have people who speak different languages and, that's totally legal. It's not like it's illegal, but the official language is still English. We use the same money. You don't go to Kentucky and have to use a Kentucky dollar instead of an Ohio dollar. It's all the same money. It brings us together. It means that, my parents live in Kentucky. I can go visit them and I don't have to worry about being in a totally different place. All right. India wasn't like that. All right. India, if you were in Ohio, you might have, spoke language A, but then the next country or the next state over, Kentucky, you might be speaking, language B. You guys might have used different money. And because of that, you're not going to interact with those people because they're so different than you. If I had to use a different type of money in Kentucky, sorry, mom and dad, I'm not going to visit a whole lot because I don't want to get caught in a car wreck and I don't have any money to cover anything. All right. Because everything was different, Indians did not see themselves as Indians. They saw themselves as different groups. So again, let's take it over to United States. I'm an Ohioan, but I'm also an American, and I kind of see myself more as an American over anything else. But there, if we were like India at the time, you know, we would be considered Ohioan, and the people in Kentucky would be Kentuckians. And there wouldn't be anything that kind of kept us together other than the fact that we were next to each other. All right. Because of this, there was little unity. There was little to no unity between the Indian people. Okay. So, like, now you have this country that's trying to take you over. If you're not unified, you're not going to be able to get them. Imagine if one country tried to just fight a war with Ohio, an entire country fighting against a state. The country's going to win. All right. Some of the states even allied with the British. So, again, let's take it into America. Let's say the British are trying to take us over and we're going to fight the British here in Ohio, but then Kentucky says, hey, you know what? We'll fight on your side, Britain. I mean, we're screwed. We're definitely not going to win that because now we got our next door neighbors fighting against us. So because of that, the British were able to get a lot of power in the country of India. All right, and I think that's question number two. So the answer to question number two is just the fact that India was not unified. Every state was different, and because of that, they weren't able to unify and get the British out of there. So here, and so for question number three, you had that chart, okay? And I think this can be the last slide. You had that chart in question number three, okay? And you had to organize all of these reasons. I think there's 10 reasons here into social, political, and economic reasons. Hopefully you guys noticed I literally gave you the answer. So I'm not going to fill out the chart myself. Just make sure you put in the right chart. For this, I'm just going to explain what each of these reasons are, okay, as to why they took over India. And then that fourth question, we'll get to it at the end. I'm not going to give you an answer because it's your opinion. But yeah, we'll kind of cover that a little bit too. So one of the reasons, so what were the social, economic, and political reasons for imperialism in India? Number one, the Mughal Empire, who was ruling India, was dissolving, so trade was disrupted, and the British wanted to make sure that that trade continued. So remember, the British are in India, and they're doing business in India, and then all of a sudden, the government starts to fail, the government starts to dissolve, and so the British are like, oh, shoot, we're going to lose our business opportunities here. So they stepped in because they didn't want to lose their money. And because this has to do with money, this is an economic reason for imperializing India. By working with different states within India, the British were able to acquire wealth and treasures during battles. So again, because they were there, they were taking some of the things that India had and using them to make money. And again, it's money, it's an economic reason. The British were afraid that the French would go to India and have more power than them, so the British attempted to get there first. Remember, this is a political reasons, and remember the political motivation for imperialism is you need to be the biggest empire. You need to be the biggest dog on the block. And the British were afraid that the French would get to India first, and the British didn't want that. So they're like, you know what? I don't even care if we want to go to India. We're going to get there so the French can't. All right. The British did not like the corruption and the cruel practices of the Indian rulers. I kind of screwed that up a little bit. So they were pressured into taking over these states for humanitarian reasons. And this is where things get a little dicey, in my opinion. India again, it's a very different place, and when you go to different cultures, you see things that you're not used to. And one thing that the Indian people were practicing was this idea of, um, in the Hindu religion, which was a large group of Indian people. So this wasn't every single Indian person. If a husband died before their wife, many times they would actually burn the wife and kill her so she can go be with her husband. Um, that's not something we practice, in our culture. That would definitely be considered murder. But this was something that was practiced, that was widespread in India. So, because of that, the British kind of use that as an example of these people are crazy, these people aren't acting right, we need to take over. So here this is where it gets dicey. It doesn't, at one end, you want to respect people's cultures, but at the other end, killing people is wrong. I truly do believe that, you know, and I put pressured in quotation marks because I really wonder if the British actually cared about changing these practices or if they just used them as an excuse, you know? Um, but these would be social reasons because, again, you're dealing with the people, you're dealing with what they called humanitarian reasons, So, again, I do want to point out that, yes, the British were kind of like, whoa, this is really crazy. Some of the stuff you guys are doing isn't cool, but did they actually care or were they just using that as an excuse? All right. So that would be a social motivation for imperialism. The British believed that their civilization and culture was better than the Indians, so they wanted to force the Indians to practice it. This is just racism. All right. This doesn't have to do with the fact that they did a little things a little bit different in India. The British believed the white man is superior to everybody else and we need to spread our culture. That's what it boils down to. All right. Um, yeah, so this is just a racist, an idea that these British people were better than everybody else. So they wanted people to practice their own society. The British were afraid that if they did not take control of the northern parts of India, the Russians would. So again, we saw this up here. We saw that the British were afraid that somebody else would go into India. The top of India is very close to Russia. So they're like, you know what? If we don't go in there first, the Russians might. And again, the political motivation for imperialism, sorry, boils down to getting there first and building the biggest empire. Doesn't even matter if you want it or need it. You just want the biggest empire. The British took over key trading posts and rivers in India to use in global trade. All right, this is an economic reason. Again, India is huge. India is bordered by a ton of countries. India has access to the ocean. India has a ton of rivers. And because of that, India is a very important place for trade to happen. Okay, so they wanted to take it over. All right, this is an economic reason. By having India as a part of their empire, they were able to, you know, participate more in global trade. All right. And then the last one, India was close to China. India is very close to China, actually borders China. The British took opium, which is a drug very similar to heroin, and they sold it to China. Okay. So India has opium growing in its country. All right. It's a drug very similar to heroin. They took that opium from the Indians and they sold it to China. All right, so then they're making money right here. The British are making money off of Indian opium. They bought Chinese silk in return. So China has very nice silk. So now the British are getting something back that they want. They want Chinese silk. So we see that it is an economic relationship here. And then, of course, British tea, which is some of the best in the world, was sold to both countries. British sold the tea to the Indians. They sold it to the Chinese. So here we just see a very specific economic relationship between the people, the British people, the Chinese people, and the Indian people. All right. And so, question 4 asked you guys to um, identify which you thought was the most important. And again, it could be either one. It could be social, it could be economic, it could be political. Whichever one you choose, you just needed to defend your answer. So, like number one, economic might be the answer because most of the reasons were economic. Usually, throughout history and politics and everything, you just follow the money wherever the money's going, and whatever people do things because they want to make money. All right, so that could be your answer, but you would have to go into detail about these individual things happening. Political is very important here as well. Again, the British don't like the French right here. The British don't like the French. The British don't want the French to get powerful. So they had to take over India before the French did. Also with Russia. I mean, Russia is a very different place. We're going to learn about Russia in the coming months. Russia is different, and they didn't want the Russians to control the northern parts of India. And then, of course, with social, this is a really big thing, just the fact that these people were racist. And many times these people act because they're racist ideas. And so that certainly could have been the most important as well. But for number four, the biggest thing is I just need you to defend your answer. All right. So make sure you check your answers. Make sure that your answers are kind of matching what I'm saying and what I put in here. If you need to go back and adjust, you can do those as well.